Okay, I think we'll kick off with our session here today. So I'd like to welcome everybody to Avolution and to the Abacus platform that we'll be looking at today. So the focus of today's session is going to be on how we can utilize Abacus to persuade, inform, and inspire. So we're going to focus on looking at how we can look at figuring out simplifying complex data through data-rich visualizations by utilizing Abacus. So you're joined here today by myself, Connor Farrell. I'm a product consultant here at Avolution, and by Ryan, who leads our APAC consulting team. Now, just to give you a brief introduction to Avolution. So we are a leader in the enterprise architecture space, an industry we have been operating for in the last 24 years. So as you can see in the top left-hand corner of our slide here, we are a leader in Gartner's critical capability analysis that analyzes organizations' ability to execute on a number of different EA use cases. Additionally, we are a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. So while I am speaking to you from our Sydney office here today, and Ryan is speaking to you from our Singapore office, we are a global organization with some of our global offices in Washington, in the US, in London, and most recently in Bogota, in Colombia. So just to give a bit of an introduction to Avolution, what we are best known for, I suppose, is the availability of numerous different frameworks within the Abacus platform. So as you can see here, we provide access to TOGAF, Archimate, BPMN, cybersecurity frameworks such as NIST, AWS, Azure, and many more. So we do have access to over 100 different frameworks within the Abacus platform, 40 of which come directly out of the box. Now, something we will be focusing on throughout our demonstration is the ability of Abacus and how it is set up as diagram-driven in addition to being data-generated. So the focus of Avolution and what we are trying to drive home for organizations is that enterprise architecture, in particular the Abacus platform, is not only something that can be used by your IT or technology teams, that it can be used by each department and all individuals across the organization. So that is something we look at focusing on today. Now, just to give a brief introduction to how the Abacus platform is actually set up. So as you can see, with the analogy of a tree here, in the roots of our tree, we have our studio platform. So this is where a lot of our heavy lifting will be done. It's where we'll start to build out our meta model, our viewpoints, and our different architectures. Once we have these created, then we'll have the majority of our users within our Abacus Enterprise or our web-based version. So here is where we'll start to build out our interactive dashboards that will include rich dynamic visualizations, ultimately stemming from different data points such as catalogs. Now, how we look at bringing information and data that already exists across your organization is through our functionality around data integration. So something we'll focus on today is how you can bring information round trip from Excel in Google Sheets. We also have the ability to take information directly across from areas you store within ServiceNow, SharePoint, and Technopedia. Additionally, if you have any diagrams already created in Visio, we can look at importing those directly into Abacus. Now, what you can see here is an example of what we'll run through today, and that is a dashboard within Abacus Enterprise. So again, from the top right-hand corner here, you can see a little more detail to what I just explained around the catalogs. And once we have data points such as our catalogs, we can begin to build out these rich data visualizations. So some examples here around some simple pie charts and some graph views that gives us an idea of how different applications across the organizations are interlinked. So this is an example of a simple application portfolio management dashboard, something we will be looking at building out later today. Okay, so what we have here is a map that identifies the different domains that exist across the organization. So while certain organizations will tend to focus on specific areas and specific domains across their organization with regards to their enterprise architecture, such as their departments or maybe their applications, what we do recommend is trying to get an idea of how your different domains are interlinked. So we might start with our business capability domain, looking at our different processes or capabilities, then having a look how that starts to funnel through to our data, application, and technology layers, and ultimately how that feeds into our strategy layers and potentially our infrastructure layers. So as I mentioned, while certain organizations might utilize something like a NIST framework to get an idea of their cybersecurity, other organizations will use a framework such as a TOGAF to get an idea of how their organization operates as a whole. Okay, now just quickly looking at some of the different use cases and how organizations and customers use the Abacus platform today. So in the bottom left-hand corner here, we can see cybersecurity scenario and risk management. So where organizations utilize the likes of a NIST framework, as I just mentioned, to get an idea of the different threats and weaknesses that exist across the organization. One of the most popular methods of using the Abacus platform is through application rationalization and transformation. So carrying out an application portfolio management dashboard where we get an idea of all of the applications that exist across your organization, which are quite efficient, which one users are actually using, and maybe areas we can look at retire or eliminating if they're not being used. Next up, we can look at mapping out cloud migration or any sort of transformation projects. Road mapping and modeling we'll focus on later in our demonstration. Innovation and ideation, then getting an idea of all of the different goals, strategies, objectives that exist across your organization. Business process management and communication, so utilizing something similar to BPMN framework. And finally, tackling technical debt, so having the ability to map out and get an idea of the total cost of ownership of your processes, your capabilities, your applications, and maybe some of your servers. Okay, the focus of today's session is going to be on a demonstration of the Abacus Enterprise site. So let's just jump straight across there. Okay, so now within Abacus Enterprise, the first area I'm going to briefly mention is around our browser or our Explorer tree. So within this, we have our meta model and our architectures. Within our meta model, the first area we look at including is our different component types. So they just relate to all of the individual areas that exist across your organization. So they could be your capabilities, your different processes, maybe some of your applications. Once we have our components created, the next step then will be looking at getting an idea of the different relationships that exist amongst those components. So it could be that a department uses an application, or maybe that an application is hosted at a specific server. So once we have our meta model created, that gives way to then looking at building out some of our architectures that we're ultimately going to use to build out our different dashboards. So some of the most popular versions of these might be around our production as is, or maybe our current state. Once we have that created, then we can start to get an idea of our future state. So that is going to be something we're going to focus on throughout today's session. So I've mentioned we would look at creating our components and our connections. We've had a quick look at our catalogs. We can look at including our matrices here. But ultimately, what we are looking at building out is our different diagrams. So just to give you a brief introduction to what some of these diagrams might be, we could have the likes of a business capability map, where we're looking at getting an overview of all of the different processes and capabilities that exist across your organization. You might be looking at mapping out your organization from a value perspective, so utilizing a value chain, or maybe trying to get an idea of all of the different goals, objectives, and strategies within a strategy one paper. So that gives us a bit of an introduction to how we build out our current state. The next step might be then to get an idea of your future state, and we can just look at starting to develop out these different mappings and with ultimately where we want to get to. Okay, I think that gives us a nice introduction to how we would start to build out the basics within Abacus, but the focus of today's session is going to be in building out some dashboards. So the first area we're going to look at is in building out an application portfolio management dashboard. So what you can see here is a simple diagram with 5 or 6 different applications that exist within this example organization. So while this looks quite limited, we will look at building out this dashboard with a couple of different visualizations, maybe a catalog to get a little more information of what exists under the hood of each of these applications. That's what we're going to start with. So first, we'll just look at adding a catalog into here. So what I can see here from my add new is the different visualization options that I can bring into my dashboard. And we're just going to start with a catalog to give us a little more information with regards to each of those applications. So what you can see here is my different architectures that I just showed in browser. And then that will allow me to select the catalog from one of those architectures. What I'm going to select here is application portfolio management. Okay. And as you can see here, this is quite similar to an Excel document that you might already have created within your organization. So we do have the ability to round trip this data and that you would have already created, bringing it directly into Abacus and to input the data like so. So The idea of our different integration functionalities is that we don't have to manually input large chunks of data when you get set up on the Abacus platform. Now, while I have 5 or 6 different applications here, what I might want to do is add an additional application into my diagram. So just to give you an idea of how simple it is to customize some of our different diagrams, we'll just look at dragging and dropping one of our components we've already created throughout our architecture into this diagram here. So let's say, okay, I'm going to add a new diagram in here. I'm going to call it app A, just for an example. It's going to search through my database here to see if it's a component I've already created, and not exactly app A, so I'm just going to create it as a new component. Again, then I can start to input more and more information into that component. So what we're looking at removing within the Abacus platform is the idea that these are quite similar to a Visio or a PowerPoint diagram where there's no underlying information. You can see the number and fields of properties here that we can look at including for each component. For now, I'm just going to go with my app A. So that has added that in here. And I might want to establish connections. Let's say app A maybe interferes or interfaces with this specific IVR component. So that has established that connection here. So once you see, you can see, once I add that into my diagram here, it also includes it into my catalog. So once I make a specific change within any of my different visualizations or catalogs, that will update my entire dashboard. We'll focus on that throughout today's session. Okay, next up, so what we can see here is a number of different properties that might have been included within an example organization and that we just looked at importing straight into the Abacus platform. However, there are a number of different functionalities that won't exist within an Excel, such as a business fit and a technical fit scoring system. And how these would have been calculated, they would have been calculated on a scoring metric of -3 to 3. So obviously that positive number more suited to the overall strategy of the organization. But when calculating these, they would have went through some of our no-code algorithms to ultimately determine how well aligned the application is to the overall strategy of the organization. What these no-code algorithms are looking at taking into account in driving out those calculations is a number of different properties. So it could be the complexity score of the application, the total cost of ownership of the application, or maybe when the end of life date is going to be for that application. And ultimately that will feed into the recommendation on what we want to do with that application moving forward. So what the Abacus platform, to that degree, is looking at supporting you with is inspiring through the presentations you might be giving to a leadership team on what you want to do with any of these applications moving forward based on data-generated decisions. Okay, so we have started to build out our dashboard. So we have a simple little diagram here. We have a catalog created. Next, we might be looking at adding a visualization, potentially giving us a little more information from a visual perspective on each of the applications. So what we might want to do is add a new pie chart. So I just selected add new, visualization and pie chart. And what we might want to have this dependent on is the recommendation on what we want to do with all of our applications moving forward. So I'm just going to call this app recommendation. Okay, and again, I have to select an architecture. I want to choose the underlying data to come from. Again, we go with Australia region business forecast, the same as we did with our catalog. Type then, obviously, we're going to focus this on our applications. Could look at it from a department perspective, a database perspective, but let's just go with application for now. Next, we'll be giving me the opportunity to select what property we're basing it on. So as I mentioned, we're going to have it on our recommendations. So I'm just going to pop down to my information, my life cycle and recommendation. Next up then, I can create a number of different options around my coloring system. So it provides you the opportunity to have the pie chart maybe mapped out in the same degree and the heat map perspective that our recommendations are here. But we'll just go with the default color scheme for now. Next up, we look at aggregating our different pie slices. We might look at showing a color legend and showing the property names. So what we have now is a pie chart dictating the number of different recommendations of what we want to do with our applications moving forward. So let's say we are presenting this data to a leadership team and we only want to focus on the areas we're going to retain or invest. So as I touch on this specific area here, what that is going to do is it will filter through the entire dashboard. So now you can see in our diagram here, it is only showing the applications we actually want to retain or invest, and the same across in our catalog. As I remove that, that'll just give me the opportunity to come back to where I was. I'm just going to save my dashboard. Okay. Next up, we might look at bringing in our business fit and technical fit scores that I just mentioned to a visualization, and how we might portray this could be through a bubble chart. Okay, so we're just going to have view, visualization, bubble charts. Okay, so we might call this biz fit versus tech fit. Okay, again, the architecture I'm going to select it from is the Australia Region Business Forecast. Type is going to be application. And as we mentioned, our X property is going to be either business fit or technical fit, and then the same for our Y property. Okay, so I'm just searching through my different properties for our business fit. There we go. And again, if I wanted to add a third property into here, what I could look at including is the size of the bubbles according to maybe the complexity score of the application, maybe the total cost of ownership of the application. But let's just go with complexity total now. Again, it's giving me a couple of options around my coloring systems. We'll just go with the default again. And for our options, we might just look at showing a legend, maybe including the subtypes. Okay, so through this, we can begin to get an idea of those applications that have that combined high score when it comes to our business fit and our technical fit. So if we pop up to our catalog, we might see that we can have our Abacus application as quite high when it comes to our business fit and technical fit. So that should be mirrored in our bubble chart here, which it is. Then if we look down the bottom left-hand corner, we can see our IBR, quite poor when it comes to our business and technical fit scores, as we can see in our catalog, and has been mirrored through our recommendation to retire or eliminate this application. Now, next up, what we might be looking at from a project management perspective could be the different dates that exist amongst these applications, potentially moving them across to a Gantt chart to support that decision-making process when looking at, okay, when are these applications actually due to expire? So what I'm going to do next is add a new visualization as a Gantt chart. Again, selecting it from that specific architecture. We're going to focus it on all of our applications. Okay, we have that there. Next, I'm going to look at the applications and how they interfere with other applications. So that is what I'm selecting here. Other options I could look at bringing into my Gantt chart is I have my list of my applications, and this allows me to see maybe what server they're hosted at, what department owns the applications, etc. So it's allowing me to bring those connections into my Gantt chart. But we'll keep it quite simple for now, and we'll just have a look at the different applications, each of our 5 or 6 applications from this diagram relate and how they relate to each other. Okay, then the dates we're looking at including will be similar to what we see in our catalog. So we'll have our start development date, into production date. We'll add another date interval, and the second one will be our into production date as far as our end of life date. And we keep our coloring code for here is blue, but we might just change this so there's 2 different colors in our diagram. We go with green here. Okay, perfect. And let's look at building that out. Okay, so as I look at maximizing this, I can see all of my different dates with regard to my different applications. So I can see when the start development date was, then how that moves across production date as it hits green, and ultimately when the end of life date. Now, one of the reasons I chose to include the interfaces connection is because we might be presenting this data to a leadership team, and what we're trying to portray is the applications we're looking at retiring or eliminating. However, even though we can see that our IVR application is quite poor in technical fit, quite poor in business fit, and it's an area we look to retire or eliminate, as we pop into our Gantt chart, we can see it ultimately supports our Abacus platform. That is an area that is performing quite highly, very important to the business, and is looking to be quite an efficient platform. So from a decision-making process, we might identify, okay, while our IVR is performing quite poorly, it does support our Abacus platform, and therefore it could be an application we look at keeping moving forward simply to support Abacus. Okay, now I'm just going to look at saving my dashboard. So While we spent 7 or 8 minutes building out this dashboard, you can see how quick it is and how customizable it is, allowing us to start to build out a bit of a presentation to maybe what we want to do with our applications moving forward, presenting this data to the leadership team. So we've got an idea of all of our applications here in a visual format. We have our Excel or our catalog here. We have a Gantt chart and our business fit and technical fit scores all in one central location. So what Abacus is trying to do is act as a single source of truth for all of the information that would be required within that decision-making process. So we're not jumping from an Excel across to a PowerPoint, potentially to a Word document to get an idea of reports. We have all of this information in one central repository available quite quickly, where we can look to filter through the different dashboards and to get a bit of a focus on exactly what we want to present. Okay, so that gives us a bit of an indication of where an organization might get started using the Abacus platform. Let's have a quick look now at where they can ultimately get to once they become a little more familiar with the technology. And what we can see here is an example of an application portfolio management that is a little more detailed. So we have a couple of different diagrams here, but we would have started from the same place where we would have got all of our information across to a catalog by round tripping the data from this example organization. The next step then might be to build out an application interface diagram. So this just gives a bit of a further view on how different components are grouped into different locations and ultimately how they're connected to other applications across the organization. So here we can see the website might be reliant on the intranet, the CMDB might feed into the monitoring system, and our Abacus and CRM platforms are supported by these different databases. Again, if we want to get a little more information about each of these components, we can just start to drill down by double clicking. And what that allows us to see from a financial perspective, what is the total cost of ownership of this application, what are the business fit and technical fit scores, and what are the different lifecycle dates with regards to our website. Again, we could continue to do this for all of our different applications. And if we go up one step further, we pop into our relationships, we can see, okay, we have our CMDB application. We want to see what other applications that interferes with. We want to see what different services or capabilities it supports, and ultimately what teams own or are driving those applications. So we can just continue to drill through this area. So it gives you a bit of an idea of the interactivity ability of the Abacus platform. Now, the next step might be to see how our different components or applications relate out to our different solution architecture. That's what you can see here. Bit of a more detailed diagram than what we had in our application interface diagram. Here, just bringing in the different servers that relate to each of these components. But this would allow us to have the first step in getting an idea of our current state, where we had all of our servers on a physical landscape, and maybe where we want to bring it across to a cloud environment. So we could look at getting an idea of what applications were previously hosted on a physical landscape, and ultimately what need to be brought across to that cloud environment. So while I have focused in particular on our applications so far, we might just pop across to the dashboard that might be of use to an organization trying to get an idea of the different strategies, goals, objectives, the different capabilities and processes that exist across their organization. And one key tool that would allow for that is their business capability map. So at that highest level, we can see our different operating processes, our management and support processes. But as we start to create those different hierarchies and those different levels, we can start to see our different subset of groups. So we might have our KPI improvements, our marketing and sales, maybe managing our customer service. So again, the heat mapping ability of the diagrams here allows us to see which applications or which processes are quite efficient at the moment, and then which processes we might want to either retain or invest in, or potentially eliminate as they're performing quite poorly. Again, we do have the ability to drill down through these areas. So while this is quite a high level view or bird's eye view where we're getting that overall look at the different processes that exist across the organization, we might want to get a little more information of what exists maybe within managing your IT. So to do that, we'll just start to drill down into further diagrams. And as you can see here, what this allows us to do is add in our different goals and objectives through a swingman diagram. We can see the different departments that support each of these applications or each of these departments, then the different applications, servers, etc., that feed into our different support codes. And again, if I wanted to bring any new components into my diagram, it's as simple as dragging and dropping these directly into here and starting to create the connections of where they support previously submitted components within this diagram. So that gives us a brief introduction into our business capability mapping. If we were wanting to focus maybe from a customer perspective, we could look at a customer journey where we kind of start here and make our full way across with different hyperlinks to give us an insight into how different areas of the customer journey actually are made up. Okay, so one area we haven't touched on that is also quite popular across the Abacus platform is our tree diagrams, where we can start to drill down through different areas to get an idea of what exists within individual processes. So if we wanted to focus on maybe managing our IT, we just continue to drill down here. Then we can see 6 different groups. If we wanted to go one step further, we might be interested to see what are the different applications that support these processes. So again, these are heat mapped according to what we want to do with each of these areas moving forward. There are also different shapes and sizes indicated of the total cost of ownership of each of these applications. Okay, one final area I might just touch on briefly is around our cloud transformation journey or any of our type of scenario analysis or getting from our current state to our future state. So what we've identified on the left-hand side here is the diagram showing us our current state where we have an ERP on-premise. On the right-hand side, a ERP cloud transformation journey where we're ultimately moving our server to be on the cloud. Now, we've brought in a number of different KPIs to give you an indication of how we present and portray this data potentially to a leadership team. So what we're looking at including here is around availability, complexity, maybe total cost of ownership, and how these areas are calculated are through our simulators. So for our complexity, just to give you a bit of insight, our complexity simulator, this will look at the total number of connections that this server has across the organization. So how many departments does it support? How many applications are sort of hosted on the server? How many different capabilities or process will have a knock-on effect on? As we can see from our diagram on the left-hand side, there are quite a lot more components included here than there would be on the right-hand side as we move to that cloud environment. And what that shows is that the complexity score has been reduced. Then we could look at maybe our response time. So while that has increased slightly, what a leadership team might be more interested in seeing is a total cost of ownership. So this calculation would have went through our financial simulator that would have showed operating expenditure, capital expenditure, potentially the total number of employees. Again, completely customizable according to what you want to include in that calculation. But it just starts to give us an idea of how we can start to get better insight into how we'll get to our future state and what will be required from a knowledge perspective and to get there, and how it will either be a positive move or a negative move for us moving forward. One final area we will look at in this dashboard is a customer experience KPI. Through this scenario, what the organization would have done is sent surveys out to the testing team that would have been looking moving from server A to server B, so from on-premise to cloud, from a customer experience perspective, and the results that they would have inputted would have been calculated and inputted through our catalogs within the Abacus platform. We can then look at plugging those properties within those catalogs and bringing them across directly here to our KPI scores.